75 years, Sir William, this
Oh
year.
yeah, the company's 75 years.
Yeah.
And we're really, we're 40 years in USA next year. So it was I was telling you about a man, almost a Henry Swayze, the sheep farm up in Vermont. It was 1974 we started with him. So he was the first one in USA. So that's 40 years there, but 75 years here, yeah.
That's a fairly good effort.
Yes, and father started. I'm not quite old enough for that. I was very young when I started, wasn't I?
Yeah, you would have been. Yeah. So did he actually invent the electric fence, your father?
No, we'd say he developed it. Now, the story starts with Joe the horse. They had an old Essex car, family Essex car, and this would have been 2930. And him and his brother, and Joe the horse rubbed his behind on it and bent the fenders and caused trouble. So we'll fix this blighter. They had a magneto which they wound up with a rubber band, a bit like a model aeroplane, and high voltage on the car and then earthed it. And so when the old car rocked, the rubber band spun and you had the ignition type voltage on the car.
Yeah.
Well, they stood around, they hid around waiting for old Joe to do it. They never caught Joe at it. But they came out one morning and it was unwound. Well, they couldn't get Joe around that side of the house, let alone anywhere near the car.
So it was working.
So it had done the job. And that would have been electric fencing. But a few years later, he'd heard about, somebody twigged, USA, electric fencing. Right, so he built one. So I guess he developed the electric fence. He would have been first to develop. And that would have been the mid-30s. And he was a dairy farmer at the time. And his view was milking cows was the last job the good Lord made.
Oh, he'd be right.
He was much happier tinkering rather than milking cows.
Yeah.
And anyway, by 1938, 39, he'd got it to full-time business, and he moved into Hamilton.
Yeah.
And then that was so started with electric fencing, and of course the early electric fence was the mechanical tick-tock model, and they were, that was the old high impedance one. Peak current flow about 150 amps, whereas our big ones now are 100 amps. And,
wouldn't want to touch them.
And your energy is square of the current, so that means that's more than 5 orders of magnitude in energy per shot. But nonetheless, they were still pretty good. They were good for dairy cattle. Oh, because this was just coming out of the recession in the 30s.
Yeah.
So low cost fencing for the dairy farm, single wire, of course, and the old dairy cows. You can nearly keep them in with warning signs,
Yeah.
Not quite, but but nonetheless, he had one because then he had a few followers because it came a bit turmoily. Oh, that was mostly after the war. There was one other brand that started within a year of Father, and then come. See, when I got involved in the 60s, there were 9 manufacturers in New Zealand. By then that was mid-70s. Because the story on how we got involved in the international standard. The CEE was the first international body. Now, CEE is the French for the European Confederation of Electrical Equipment, but it's French. And they produced a standard in 1948, which was the old 100 milliamps.
So you weren't allowed over that?
Yes, that was, but then there was changes to limit the energy by doing it inside the controller instead of the performance, mainly because it was difficult to measure the performance. But equipment was available at the time, and we soon had equipment to do it. Now, they were proposed to limit it to 5 joules stored, which would have been a real impediment. So we got involved. We organised the New Zealand standard, and I had 9 manufacturers in New Zealand. And then New Zealand, we didn't have status with CEE, but Australia did, and I happened to be on the New Zealand standards. When he said, righto, I got nominated to represent Australia.
Oh, yeah?
And Australia was an observer status, but that's fine. So the first meeting was in 77 in Budapest in Hungary. And that was our communist days, of course.
Yeah.
That was great. There were 23 countries. And the chairman was Danish. Now, the Danes were the most advanced in Europe with electric fencing. They had something about a fifth of where we were, whereas the Germans were a thousandth of what we were. So they'd gone a different road. but the Danes were the chair, or they were the secretariat. And anyway, being in Australia, a big advantage, that means you're in the front row, sitting next to Austria and Belgium, you see. Whereas
in
New
the
Zealand,
A's.
I would have been up the back, and alphabetically, the back I would have been with the Norwegians and the Dutch. So anyway, the first morning I must have spoke for about half an hour on several subjects. And then I go to morning tea with the German delegation. And they say, Bill as I was then, or William says, "You do not speak English like the Queen. We do not understand what you're saying."
They don't like the Kiwi accent.
and that was great, because those guys, when I heard them getting up and proposing things that we knew didn't work, I said, let's get a hold of this market before these guys wake up.
Yep, yeah.
So that was good fun. And anyway, I got, not only did I get nearly everything I wanted, I got a few things I didn't expect to get. So we got that standard in pretty good shape. And then the next thing, should have been elevated to the IEC, which is, the ISO, the International Standards Organisation, and the International Electrical Commission. They're both about 80-odd, 90-odd years old. They're both very old organisations. And this one really come under IEC, and they were forming a committee which came under the appliance section. So that's Committee 61, and then 61 was the safety of electrically operated farm appliances. And I put our hand up saying, well, if New Zealand's going to make a contribution on the international stage, the agricultural equipment is the best for us. So we put our hand up, and we got the secretariat, and we've still had it. And that worked great, because the chairman was Australia initially, and then South Africa, and then Australia.
Yeah.
But that really means we got, it's all above board. But it really means that you can have influence in the right direction.
Yeah.
And there's no doubt the use of electric fencing. New Zealand is by far the number of energisers per farmer we sell here would be 4 or 5 times who's coming second, which is probably Australia, I guess. And well, you go into a farm here, and there's nothing wrong with the old one, but the new one's more powerful. And quite often you see the line on the wall. And keeping the old one there is fine. If lightning takes one out, well, you've still got another
You mean
one.
they don't bother taking the other one out of the wall shed, just leave it there
quite
and
often,
put another one
it's still
beside it?
there. And if lightning, because we're getting them much better. They really will stand quite a good dose of lightning these days. But nonetheless, if they all spread, if they really get a direct hit, they're all spread around the wool shed.
Yeah.
Well, I find you don't get a complaint. If they're blowing to bits, that's allowable. But if they just stop working, that's not good enough.
Yeah.
So we've got them pretty good now. You can belt them. I've seen wires. I've seen lightning, burn fence wires, and the energizer's still ticking. And I give credit to old Doug Phillips in Rotorua, who showed us that very high current for a short time made, at the time, what was called the unshortable electric fence. Now, we don't use that term now, but it was about 4 or 5 orders of magnitude more energy. That's 100,000 times more energy per shot. And what a difference that makes. You can have wires on the ground, you can have vegetation growing through it, and they've got even better since.
Yeah.
But in many parts of the world, and my comments today were particularly aimed at the North American market, which is our biggest market, but we sell tens of thousands of what I call toy electric fences. Now, we'd call them strip grazers here. But I know in many applications they're being bought for, permanent fencing. Well, they're going to be horribly disappointed. Yes, it'll work while it's nice and new.
Why do they do that?
Because they're cheap.
Yeah.
And believe it or not, in America, when we first got up there, we would... let me tell the story about my first guy, because it's 40 years this year we're in USA. And my first guy was a sheep farmer in Vermont. And he sees a slideshow from Scotland, where we'd been in Scotland.
Yeah.
And he saw a sheep being grazed behind 3 wires on a hillside. And he looked at it and he says, "What sort of electric fence is that? There's nothing like this in USA." And anyway, he got hold of us, and at that time we had about a 5 joule energizer, which is still a reasonable size energizer today. We were really starting to get underway in Germany by 1980, 81. The most powerful mains unit in Germany, the digital voltmeter would drop the voltage, and a digital voltmeter is 100,000 ohms. And that would be about 1/100th of our torch battery strip grazer. And what the Germans had done, they'd done their studies on how little how how small a shock do you need to stop an animal? And it's not very much. But totally wrong question.
Yeah.
The question is, how much energy do you need to pour in to overcome grass leakage and still have something left to stop an animal?
Yeah, yeah.
That's why, the most powerful the better. They're still safe across the terminals, and that's the main protection,
Yeah.
as long as they comply with the international standard. And as I mentioned, the IEC is the main authoritative body on international standards, and the good news, New Zealand, we're the secretariat. Which
Yeah. How did that come about? Did you have anything to do with that?
Oh, I did happen to manage that, yes. And in fact, that's another very long, interesting story. But so that's in good shape. So we've got a very good standard and very effective electric fencing. But in USA, all electric fencing is considered the same. This one's $40, and in fact, when we started in USA, you could buy them for $40. We were going to be about same comparison, same margins. We would have been about $250. But the $40 one, there's no money for marketing.
Yeah.
There's no money for search and development. So my guy says, well, don't let's be 5 times the price. Let's be 10 times the price. And then we've got some money to sell it. Well, here we are, 40 years later, we're finally on top.
Oh, good.
And we're on top, certainly on top by volume. But the number of big energizers we sell is still disappointingly low. We sell tens of thousands of, well, believe it or not, the small solar, about a 0.1 joule solar unit, which is a good strip raiser.
Yeah.
But if they use that for permanent fencing, they're going to be disappointing. Now, New Zealand, your customers, they understand good electric fencing. They don't, and in fact, New Zealand, the cheap rubbish is totally unsaleable. And the good news here, accessory rubbish is pretty well unsaleable too.
Yeah.
And another interesting story on that subject, we're very much involved in Chile, and we have a lot of New Zealand farmers over there. And my previous Chilean partner, he would only buy the rubbish product, made in China, super cheap, but not even good value. And we don't put our name on it, but my guys in Europe want to have that so they can apply the whole thing. In fact, I would have liked to use the Park brand, P-A-R-C. And if you spell it backwards, you get the quality.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
Crap. I don't want our name on that.
No.
But we've made that unsaleable in Chile.
Yeah, yeah.
Which is really good. The New Zealanders, they'll, the good stuff, the good accessories are better value for money. They last longer, and you can, give them the normal farmer treatment and they don't fall to bits.
Yeah.
You buy this Park brand stuff, and
crap.
You drop it a few times and it's in pieces, and
Yeah.
Warrant until you get it to the door type of thing.
Yeah.
That's not even good value, even if it is cheap.